Would you rather own 100% of a little grape or 10 to 30% of a massive watermelon? Welcome to the Nine Doors Down Show, where we discuss anything and everything about commercial real estate and investing. Let's get it.
Nine Doors Down.
John Lopez.
Nine Doors Down.
Hi, this is Tony Rose.
Nine Doors Down.
Hi, this is Anthony Pimentel.
Educating, capital raising, networking.
Nine Doors down. Nine Doors down.
This is called a show.
Man, Anthony, I think we're going international with this episode.
Mr. Worldwide, yeah, for sure.
It's this one is going to be very interesting for ourselves and as well as our listeners, because we're going to see real estate from two sides of the North American continent. We're going to see the Canadian side, the U.S. side, and then also we were going to emphasize why Canadians should look into investing into the United States. And so with us, it's a pleasure and an honor to bring on our guest. But before I say his name, we're going to run through his bio real quick. So our guest is Mr. Thomas Lorini. He is the founder and managing partner of Ventureco Capital, a private investing firm with over $80 million of AUM. He has been successfully investing across Canada and the U.S. over the past 15 years. Following his studies in mechanical engineering, he worked in the manufacturing industry for 18 years, including owning his own precision machining company. Thomas is a partner with Wealth Genius. Let me say that again. Thomas is a partner with Wealth Genius, a real estate educational network with members all across North America. The group collectively will approach $1 billion in acquisitions by the end of 2023. Thomas now resides in beautiful Southern California, along with his wife, Julia, of 14 years, and their 3 children. He enjoys playing soccer and hiking. For everyone tuning in at home or in the showers or in the car or doing chores, this is our featured guest, Mr. Thomas Lorini.
Hey,
What's going on, gentlemen?
How you doing, Thomas, man? It's we said it during the intro, but this is an honor and a privilege to have you on our podcast. So we thank you.
Thank you, man. Thank you both for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's great to kind of continue this amazing relationship that we have. We've met about earlier this year. It's been about a year now, right?
It's about a year, yeah. Winter of last year.
Yeah. Time flies. It's amazing.
It sure does.
I'm excited to be on your podcast, share a little bit about what I know, my experience with your audience, and just go from there, man.
Yeah. So let's get into your contact info now before we forget. Where can people find you on social media, your website, your email,
Sure.
so on and so forth?
Easiest is probably off of IG, Real Thomas Lorini. You can also find me on my website, thomaslorini.com, or my investment firm, venturecocapital.com.
All right. So as we dive in, Thomas, before we get into the meats and potatoes of your real estate venture, what was life of Thomas Lorini before coming out to California and before starting Ventureco Capital and before becoming a kick butt coach with Wealth Genius?
Oh man. Well, let's go back in time. Let's go back to the Great White North. So I was born in Toronto, Canada. My background, as you alluded to, it was in manufacturing. So I went to school for mechanical engineer, and I was in that industry for a number of years. I worked for a number of automotive industry companies, and eventually opened my own precision machining company. And that was my world until I was reading, I think, either Robert Kiyosaki's book, and I got inspired about becoming an investor and getting outside of the matrix, and I'm taking control of my life. But my surrounding friends, colleagues, and so forth, they were kind of like that corporate America lifestyle and mentality. So it really took a number of years for me to kind of get in the right environment. So my first experience of being a landlord was when I rented my basement. So yes, in Canada, there's basements. And I was a single guy living in a 3-bedroom townhome. I figured, you know what? There's too much space for me. Why not rent the basement? I did that, and then that tenant ended up paying for my mortgage. And I was like, oh, this is kind of nice, right? I mean, this is my first taste of being a landlord, first taste of having someone kind of fund my life. But I was like, I mean, I don't know how to do more of this. I put my life savings into acquiring that property at that time. And I was working a job, but I didn't know anything else. So fast forward about 6 years, I finally committed to joining a group, a network, which I had to pay to get into, but it was money well spent because within months, I was able to acquire my next property. And then months after that, another property. So that was in essence the starting point where I got into the right environment. I remember the first time walking into that group, into that network, talking to someone, and he mentioned he only owned 6 properties. And I was like, only 6 properties. And that was just a mind explosion because I'm stressing over one property and one mortgage, and he's talking only 6. And he's like, yeah, there's people own hundreds of doors here. I'm like, wow, okay, I'm in the right place. So sure enough, I joined, got my first official rental property, which was a duplex, and it was game on from there. And then I was still, doing real estate kind of on the side. Those were side investments while I had my own business. So now, I mean, I should add that my wife's American, so I got the golden ticket, if you will, into the US by marrying an American. So after 5 cold winters, she was like, I'm done. I'm done with the snow and the ice. It's time to move back into the sunshine. So, she twisted my arm and I agreed. So we moved to California. I sold the company, packed up shop, moved to California. And honestly, like I wasn't really quite sure what I was going to do. I'm like, you know what? It's a leap of faith. At that time, we had 2 kids when we moved. We basically sold off, everything in our home and just put a trailer in the back of the Volvo. Me and my dad drove across America. Wife and kids flew to Cali. And that was a great trip, by the way. Me and my dad did a road trip. Took a nice week. Went up in the mountains of Colorado. Went to Vegas, watched some shows. So that was fun. But we moved to Cali, and I basically decided to transition full-time to real estate. I saw what real estate was doing. At that time, we had about 5 properties, and I was like, all right, I could see the potential. And I had such a network built up that people were now reaching out to me to potential partner up. And I was like, oh, okay, so I can continue to do this real estate thing without using all my money and being able to do long distance. Because when I first moved to the US, I had no US credit, no US tax return. I wasn't bankable at that moment, right? But I was in Canada and had a good network. So pretty much I kept doing all these deals long distance. I find properties, lock them up, bring in a partner, a friend, a relative, and we partner up, and I would just continue to add to the portfolio. It wasn't until several years later when I got into US real estate. Because at that point, I had the experience, I had the credibility, the credit, and so forth. I was bankable, and then I started exploring markets and getting into real estate on the U.S. side of things. So I went through probably about a 15-year time frame from acquiring that first property to getting my second property about 6 years later, and then to moving to the U.S. probably another 6 years after that. So it wasn't a quick thing for me. I mean, it was a slow process. Thankfully, I started, early enough. These days people are starting a lot earlier, but I started early enough where, I was able to build a solid, base of assets and then gain that experience. But over the last 10 years, guys, I mean, I've been full-time in real estate and things have just consistently leveled up for me. I just want to encourage the audience, whoever's watching this, wherever you are. I mean, from owning 0 to maybe owning some properties, this is a journey, and it takes effort, and it takes surrounding yourself around other people that you can learn, that you can glean off of them, and support each other, get the right motivation, get the right advice to level up. And now, today, I mean, it's a totally different kind of playing field that I'm in, but it's been exciting in just talking about this to look back to where it all started.
Yeah, I got to jump in right here, man, because I firmly believe that things happen for a reason, right? And so maybe about 2 years ago, or maybe about a year and a half ago, me and Anthony we're talking amongst each other. Man, did you know that Canada doesn't have double-digit IRRs, right? As far as it goes, like in real estate or specifically multifamily, we didn't know anyone in Canada. And then our buddy of ours out here in Las Vegas, who's originally from Canada, Martin, comes into play, right? So this is probably like 4 months after me and Anthony had that conversation. So, shout out to Martin with Melee Properties.
Yes.
But Martin introduced us to you, right? And seeing the Canadian side of real estate and also the US side of real estate, what are some distinguishing factors of kind of what separates the two models from one another?
Yeah, great question. One of the main conversations that I have on a daily basis, the difference between Canada and the US is substantial. Number one, we can start with just the size of Canada, not from a geographic size, because too often people look at Canada, oh, Canada's a big country. Yeah, maybe size-wise, but the population of Canada is not that much in comparison. I mean, the entire population of Canada is less than the state of California. So when you kind of put that into perspective, you're like, oh, okay. So Canada's relatively small. We've got probably around less than 40 million people in the entire country. So from that perspective, you can kind of say, okay, well, less people, maybe less opportunities. Yes. Then let's talk about affordability. The average price of a home in Canada is pushing $800,000. The average price of a home in the US is pushing $350,000. So now you have this dynamics playing from an affordability standpoint. Canada is very expensive when you compare it to the average. I know too often we look at Los Angeles or New York, but take out those kind of areas. On average, the homes across the US, they're at $350,000. Many markets, there's at least 10 states where the median home price is less than $200,000. All right. So I'm just planting that seed to help the audience understand affordability. There's a lot of affordability across the US. In fact, the US is actually it is the most affordable country in the world. There was a study, they've done a very extensive analysis of all the different metrics from employment to wages to cost and so forth. And they really did comparison of all the top 50 countries in the world, and the US was number one for affordability specifically. So now you've got the size, the population, much in favor in the US, 10 times the size of the population. You've got affordability in your favor in the US. Now let's talk about the laws. So Canada predominantly is a more socialistic environment compared to US. US, much more capitalistic, business friendly. So because of that, a lot of the laws, the rules are much more favorable here on the US side of things. We've got things like the 1031 exchange, cost segregation, bonus depreciation, all these elements that help real estate investors. Unlike in Canada, they don't have those things. And then you add in the landlord laws in Canada, the landlord tenant laws, not favorable in Canada. So Ontario is the most populated province in Canada, where Toronto, Ottawa reside. It is a rent control environment. So it makes it very difficult for a landlord to succeed. It probably, in my opinion, is the most challenging environment for a landlord in all North America. And I live in Southern California. So yes, there's rent control in many places across the US, but in Canada, it's not just the rent control. It's just the landlord-tenant board and the process of eviction and so forth. There's been many cases, landlords are waiting 1.5 to 2 years to evict a tenant. So it really puts things it makes it very difficult for an investor to succeed in that market. So now you add that element versus you have plenty of states, and you guys know this, that much more control as a landlord. I'm investing in markets where there's no rent control. I can set the rent wherever I want. There's no rent continuation. So once the lease is over, it's like, thank you very much. You're gonna have to move out. I got someone else moving in. So you have got more control, more predictability. So when I'm looking at a value opportunity and you do a side-by-side comparison, all right, I find a 50-unit building in Canada or a 50-unit building in a state that's landlord friendly, like Ohio or Texas, and you're like, all right, I'm gonna do an analysis. The rents are low, and I want to raise the rent. Rents are, there's a 30% upside in rent. Great. But now you're in a rent control market. How long will it take you to turn over those units? Well, I'm not quite sure. Maybe it take me this time, maybe that much time. Well, how do you even get these people out? If they know, which most tenants know, that they're significantly below market, well, maybe cash for keys. Well, I mean, it's not going to be that easy. It's no longer a couple $1,000s and they're willing to move. Tenants are, they're savvy. They're going to have to pay significantly 5 digits. Used to be a time where even $10,000 would work. No longer. You're paying probably 20, 30, maybe even $50,000 to get a tenant to leave a unit. So, and it's not predictable. There's some people say, I'm not going to move no matter what you pay me. So now, how do you go into the environment? How do you run your numbers? How do you analyze a deal like that when you're saying, well, the potential for this asset is X, but I don't know when I can get there because I don't know when I can turn these units over. And you compare that to a more landlord-friendly environment where it's like, all right, I know I can turn over 1 or 2 units per month in this building if I want to. You got that kind of control. So we can easily say within a 3-year period, we should be able to have turnover pretty much the majority of this building, and the valuation is much more predictable in that case. So again, from a risk analysis, from opportunity standpoint, and more control, so much more favorable. What else? I can go on and on. Mortgage rates in Canada, most mortgages only lock in for 5-year terms. So every 4 or 5 years, that's a huge thing, right? Because why is that a big thing? Well, look at the condition we find ourselves in today, right? Rates are like pushing 8%. Who would have predicted that a year or two ago? Nobody. But because of that, Canada is much more affected than the US. As much as we are in the US and we're like, well, it's tough now as a buyer and so forth. Yeah, but if you're a property owner here in the US, most likely you've locked in for 30 years. And if you've done it within, previous, before a year ago, you probably locked in a pretty decent rate, 3, maybe 4%. So you're laughing right now. And you're like, all right, I got my 3% rate. I'm not going to move. I got another 18 years of this or 25 years of this. So you're fine. The rates don't affect you. Unlike in Canada, where now it's like the rates have jumped up considerably, 3 or 4 times where your current rate is. Now you're beginning for a big sticker shock. Your rate's coming up in a couple of years, next year, and now you're like, wait a minute, I was paying $2,000. Now you're telling me I'm paying like $6,000. I'm like, I can't afford that. So that's a huge factor. That's on the general population, not even talking investors. So again, big difference between Canada and US that most Americans aren't aware of. And that's why I'm just trying to, bring awareness. Hello, Canadians. I know what's going on there. I'm coming from there. I know how it works. I've had some bad apples. I've had some situations, but there are greener pastures.
Welcome to the course on raising capital for investments. In this course, we'll cover the following topics. 1, analyzing your investment strategy. Number 2, discovering potential investors. 3, crafting your pitch. 4, securing your investment. 5, our cheat code. We'll round out the program with our very own cheat code for getting in front of investors and being ready to pitch your investment opportunities. Take action today. Visit schoolofninedoorsdown.com and learn to attract capital.
So basically what you're trying to say, us spoiled people here in the US got to stop complaining.
100%, Anthony, 100%.
I'm
laughing sometimes. I'm like, what are you worried about? What are you complaining about? You don't know what's going on.
You don't know what's going on across the border. That's exactly. I mean, that's free. That's so amazing. Exactly what you just said. It's like it gives us perspective on the other side of the border, right? But what I was going to ask you is, as an investor in the Canadian side, is the are the investing kind of like process very similar? From, I understand the mortgage side. You said it's only 5 years, but
Sure.
acquiring a property,
Yeah.
I guess documentation wise, is that pretty much the same
Yeah,
as
good
the US?
question. I would say like 80-90% of the process is very similar. So you submit an offer, a PSA, in most Canadian markets, we don't use an escrow, they use lawyers. So you basically have lawyers that are facilitating on your behalf. But still have deposits, inspections, so similar kind of like process in terms of going through it. Financing, one thing I should note is proof of funds is not a thing there. So how I mean, this was a big
Wow.
surprise when I moved from Canada to US. I'm starting making offers like, where's your proof of funds? I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, oh no, we need to see, like, you're buying this property for $1 million. Where's your money? I'm like, oh. I'm like, well, I usually figure that out after. They're like, no, no, we want with the offer. I'm like, oh, okay. So in all categories, even as a realtor here in Cali, I represent buyers, and we're like, well, we need to have your proof of funds. Where's your deposit money coming from? Where's your financing? Have you solidified it? Have you been underwritten? That way the seller feels confident that you can perform. But that's not the situation in Ontario and back in Canada, where you can make offers, lock up properties all day long. But you obviously got to be careful. So the pro is that you don't have to have your funds all dialed in when you're submitting the offer, but you usually have a shorter contingency period. So sellers aren't dumb. They're gonna give you a short leash, and they're gonna want you to go firm. So you have to really be careful that you're gonna be able to remove any contingencies and go firm within a much shorter time period. So that's something that kind of was a big surprise. And that's why I'm advising all my Canadian students. I'm like, listen, it's not just a matter of making an offer. You need to have your money, your funds prepared. So, and all the way down to like in some cases, depending on what type of asset, having a bank account and the funds seasoned, right? Because money's coming from where? The lender's going to ask. Well, it's coming from Canada. Oh, who's where in Canada? And it's like, oh, well, you raise the money through a bunch of people. Oh, that's going to be a problem versus having the funds seasoned for a few months, sitting in a bank account in the US, and then you kind of sidestep any of those challenges. But the process in general, Anthony, is relatively similar. You still have a similar paperwork, but every area has got a little bit different disclosure part of it, but for the most part, very similar.
Got it. Now, as far as the interest rate, do they kind of mimic the US? Is it very similar? Or
Yeah,
maybe a little higher?
predominantly, like my experience has been Canadian interest rates tend to be actually a little lower than US interest rates. So even while I was living in Canada and I'd monitor rates, the rates in the US tend to be about 1% higher than in Canada. There were some years, maybe about 15 years ago, and remember, we're refinancing every 4 or 5 years, right? So there's
Right.
some times where we're refinancing only for 3 years. And people in the US don't understand that. Variable rates are very common back in Canada. And traditionally, variable rates have been better rates than the lock-in rates, usually 3/4 points lower. So there'll be times, I mean, I can't remember exact year, maybe it was like 2008, 2009, where the rates dropped. I was getting below 1%. I was like 0.8%, 0.75% interest rate for my mortgage. Now, it would have been for 3 years or 4 years, maximum 5 years. And at that time, I would have to renew. But I mean, just like, the States, I mean, the market's done very well in Canada. And actually, one thing I should mention, when the market tanked here in '08, it didn't tank in Canada. So the Canadian market had a very long upswing. Really started in the late '90s, early 2000s, and it was just nonstop. It was crazy. Because I can remember as a kid in the '90s where everything was flat. My parents tried to sell their home 3 times during the '90s and it didn't sell. The market was flat, not much appreciation. And then things started to change as we got into, Y2K. We got into 2000 and the market started getting better and better and the population started increase. They started building condos. That became a thing. I think Toronto led the world in cranes at various instances over the last 20 years because of the amount of condos they had built. And market kept doing well, kept doing well. Spec, people were buying homes on spec. That's a thing back in Toronto. Like it's not very popular in many markets in the US, but that's a very big thing where it's like 2 years before construction, people are buying these properties based on blueprints type of thing, right? Putting deposits down. Oh yeah, the property will be worth more in 2 years than now, right? Yeah, when the market's swinging up, great. But what's happened in the last year? Not so great. So a lot of people got caught, and now they're like in a very challenging situation where you locked in your price and the value is like hundreds of thousands of dollars lower. So again, it's been interesting to see how markets differ, but in general, the U.S. offers so much more for real estate investors, and I think going forward, it's only going to get better on this side for Canadians. It's getting tougher. The rules they're implementing in Canada, they banned foreign investors for 2 years from investing in Canada. Just craziness, craziness.
So let me hop in here. So with my experience, I mean, with us three, we know the powers of real estate, right? And I know with me, when if I talk to friends and family, like if I'm explaining the powers of real estate, like I could only lead the horse, to the water, but I can't force him to drink it. So with your experience and as a coach, and you're laying out all these gems, does everyone see the light about U.S. real estate, or is there still a lot of limiting beliefs that your Canadian counterparts have about investing into another country?
Well, that's one of the main starting points when I present to Canadians. It's the idea of eliminating the border. I help position them to say, listen, the US is just another market. Just like maybe you live in Toronto and then BC is on the West Coast. Well, that's another market. Or you go on the East Coast like Halifax, that's another market. It's hours away, like maybe 5 hour plane ride on the other side of the country. These are all different markets. Unfortunately, because of where prices had gone in general in the main populous areas in Canada, people were going up north, very rural towns, if you will. And that's where my concern was. I'm like, well, why would you go to a town with like, 1,000 people and invest in an asset there when an hour drive south, you're in the US? Well, people are like, I'm not sure, tax. So it tends to be tax and the unknown element that would kind of debilitate people from kind of venturing into US, right? But I kept emphasizing eliminate that. Canadians are the number one foreign investors in the US. So it's already happening. So I encourage them saying, with or without you, it's happening. So the system is there. Now just understanding how you can take part in it. So I think more and more, especially over the last year, where just certain things in the political realm in Canada, more and more people are really considering the US because it's becoming more of a thing. I mean, Canadians are investing in the US. They see the opportunities through social media, through information and so forth. They're realizing, hey, I don't have to continue to work in this particular sandbox. It's just challenges left and right. I bought a few properties, had some bad tenants. It's been a nightmare. So do I continue to go down this path? Or wait a minute, let me check out what this guy's talking about or what's going on over there. And so the reception has never been more positive right now for Canadians to invest in the US, but there's still hesitation in general, John, because of the unknown. But my whole thing is that we can get rid of those unknown elements. Is it a tax question or concern? Let's talk to the right accountant. You're not going to talk to just your mom and pop little accounting firm. You're going to talk to the right cross-border CPA who understands, real estate, who understands, all the different challenges of setting yourself up. Then we'll talk to the right legal team to kind of get your asset protection set up and so forth, the entity structures and all that good stuff. Let's get those addressed, right? And then once those are addressed, now let's find the financing, the gas, if you will, to get this vehicle moving, and then we go hunting for deals. So again, I'm doing my best. I think Canadians are starting to realize they got to take this serious to explore the U.S. market, and they're starting to take action.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm now the other thing is like you mentioned about the unknown. It's like there's that fear, right? Because there's a cost involved to kind of get these entities set up in order to, be able to invest in the U.S. as compared to Canada. Like you said, if you go up north or different provinces, um, are there also different regulations per province? Like if you're investing, I'm not familiar with all the different. I know there's Toronto, but I mean,
Yeah,
is
so
there
there are there
different
are there are
expenses?
there are a good question. So if you're talking from an expense standpoint, yes, just like in the US, if you're going to acquire property, you're most likely to create an entity. Is it a single tiered or multi-tiered structure? That's something that you're going to have to figure out based on the type of investment and and your vision of what you're trying to do. Now in Canada, same thing. There are certain considerations. Is there going to be more cost? Maybe, perhaps a slightly little more cost. If you're like just an individual on the U.S. going to go private property in the U.S., you probably set up an LLC, maybe a holding company. In Canada, you guys set up a few entities, but you got to know the right ones. And the cost to set them up, yeah, might be a little more expensive. So as an American, opening up an LLC, that's a couple $100. You can literally do that online on your own. I mean, Canadian can't do that. So most likely they're going to have to use the right lawyer, create the right entity structure. Now you may be paying $3,000, instead of a couple $100 to create that one entity, and maybe $4,000 or $5,000 if you're creating maybe a couple entities. So the cost is a little higher, but in general, once it's set up, I mean, then the process from there is not that much different. The tax filings and stuff, it's not necessarily that much more. I mean, Canadians still got to file tax in Canada. Now just an additional filing in the U.S. Depending on which firm you use, a couple $1,000. It shouldn't be more than that to issue a tax return for an entity in the U.S. So that shouldn't be the debilitating factor, unless of course you're going to buy like a $80,000 single family home, and then you got to factor, do I want to spend like $6,000-7,000 to set this up? But if you have a vision of creating a portfolio of assets in the U.S., then you guys want to spend the right amount to justify and protect yourself and to be able to grow.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I feel like as a new investor, a lot of the things is the I guess the investment itself, right? It's the cost of doing business is for you. You need to create that entity if you want to legally or do it the correct way. And I think, early in my entrepreneur kind of journey, spending money was like, oh, is this spending money? Is it wasting money? Or is it really investing into what you said, this vision of this journey that you're going to be putting yourself in? So that's really good. And I'm glad that you kind of showcase that where you teach, you educate your students on these and everything from tax to legal and get them connected to the right people. So that's awesome. And I think it's valuable to new investors specifically.
Yeah, 100%. Even the fact how you mentioned the cost. So like when we're underwriting deals, it's very important to add those costs to your pro forma. Too often you go online and you look at a basic kind of pro forma. Basically, you got the income and expenses and your debt service, but many times what's missing in some of the expenses are kind of like the business expenses, right? Your accountant costs, your legal costs, your entity creation costs. We've got tax, insurance, maybe utilities, but what about these other costs that are going to happen? You should implement them and then understand how your assets performing. Because if not, you kind of give yourself a false sense of reality of how this asset's going to perform. So I emphasize that part of it as well to my students. I'm like, all right, great. This is the asset itself, but what other expenses do you need to factor in besides like the day-to-day the day-to-day operational stuff? There's the initial setup and ongoing kind of like filings and so forth that they should implement.
Yeah, no, thank you, Thomas. Now, as far as like the dialogues that you're having with your students and also the your other fellow coaches, what type of U.S. asset classes really get you guys excited, and like pretty much like in what territories and pretty much the buy box that you would recommend someone who's looking into the US for the first time to look into?
Yeah, great question. And I mean, this conversation, that this particular, topic can go in so many different ways. In general, as I mentioned, affordability is a huge attractiveness for Canadians. So markets where you can find apartments where you're acquiring for 50 to 60,000 per door don't exist in Canada. In addition, anything over 30,000, anything over 30 units anything over 30 units is very hard for the common investor to get access to in Canada. Most markets don't even offer those kind of products. So now for the most part, I'm advising my students to look at markets that the price point is attractive, lower barrier to entry, all right? And they're able to acquire these properties, like I mentioned, 50, 60,000 per door, where there's strong metrics in terms of revenue as well. So some of the deals for these Canadians may be buying a duplex for like $150,000, but that it rents for about $1,500 a month. So you're reaching at least that 1% rule. And in most cases, there are several markets where we're far exceeding the 1% rule. There's been a few buildings I've actually acquired this year where we're acquiring for 50, 55K per door, but we're hitting about $1,500 in rent, in gross rent. So now you're exceeding it by almost a 3-factor type of thing, or almost that 3% rule. So in that environment, the potential for cash flow is that much greater, right? So, and as investors, we have to kind of balance depreciation, cash flow, kind of game. Ultimately, we want to make sure the property carries itself and it's turning over, and it's creating cash flow predictability, right? And at the same time, you do want to have some appreciation. The appreciation is going to be that kind of like, that long-term wealth creation, either forced appreciation or natural appreciation. You want that appreciation in your assets. So those are the kind of focuses I get my students looking at. And ultimately, because of the financing challenges new Canadian investors will have, it's really getting into the game. And there's two paths I always suggest. One is the slow and steady. There are foreign investor finance products available, like off-the-shelf products for foreign investors, 1 to 4 units. That's the challenge. So you may want to just do 3, 4, 2 duplexes or 4plexes to build a track record in the US as a Canadian, build that credibility, building a solid base of assets, and then approach a lender to level up into some larger financing options. Because the reality is, a new investor from Canada, you're a foreigner. You have no credit, you have no history, you have no income generating in the US. So the risk is very high for these American lenders. But after a year or two, if you can show them, hey, I've done 4 or 5 deals, I own 4 or 5 properties in the US, I've got several bank accounts, I've got US credit, I've done several filings already. So now you're a much different level, and the risk has considerably been reduced for these lenders to lend to you at that point. Alternatively, the second option for these Canadians is consider partnering with some Americans. Because ultimately, by partnering with Americans, you're going to leverage their experience. And in most cases, you don't have to worry about financing or even finding a property. You just get into like a 50-unit deal right off the bat. And what that creates now is like, now you're in the game. You can leverage the experience of that team, and then going back to your Canadian network, you have the credibility now of getting into large deals and be able to showcase that to your Canadians in case you're looking to kind of scale from that aspect, raising capital and so forth. So those are kind of the two paths I kind of suggest my students to explore, and some are going either way.
Yeah, thank you for that, Thomas. And just on my behalf, like, your students are very fortunate, because I didn't have a formal coaching program when I first got into it. Luckily, I had my wife and Anthony to kind of like, pave the way for me, right? But as far as like, because Wealth Genius, you guys are big in Canada, but you guys are also growing here in the United States. What are some things what are some of the benefits that someone from here in the US or the Canada if they're looking at a coaching program, why should they select Wealth Genius?
Yeah, great question. I always tell people the secret sauce of Wealth Genius is the people. We've got like approaching 900 members of very good quality people. It's definitely a range of experience in the group. I mean, there are people doing hundreds of millions of dollars of business in the group, and you've got brand new investors. And the dynamics of the group is very, I mean, it's very good in so many different ways. So we allow people to integrate and connect and build relationships. We don't control the relationships between members. So people are partnering up, investing in each other's deals, lending money and so forth. So there's all that benefits that a network like this can provide. You backed out with the strong educational platform that we offer. You know, we've got training modules that are pre-recorded to take anyone from any level, you know, through a series of training to be able to get active and start investing. And some people join the group very experienced, or some join new, and we'll cater to that. And the expansion into the US. So now we're no longer just a Canadian company, it's a North American company. And really, actually, some members are doing deals in Mexico and in Central America as well. But the main thing is the growth. When I joined about 2 years ago, there were only about 110 members. So in 2 years, we've gone 8 times the size. So we're seeing a growth that's been rapid. We're seeing again the different segments. I should also mention. So the founder is predominantly a multifamily investor, and same with myself. I'm mainly a multifamily investor, but we do realize there are other subsections of real estate. So we've added different training streams to accommodate some of these different investing options. For instance, wholesaling. I mean, that's a popular investment stream, an investment segment of real estate. So we brought on a coach, Thea, who's a wholesaler, and now she is the wholesale coach for the group. And she's got a number of students that want to focus on that particular stream. We also have someone we recently added who's in the STR, MTR space. So Donalta is the coach for people who want to get into that type of training. We've got land development, Karina, who does land development. So she's able to coach these individuals that want very specific training on land development and so forth. So it's not just a one type of training. We've kind of catered it, and we've got multiple streams, and now we've got across multiple countries. And really the vision is to continue to expand all across the US. And the benefits I see is that the cross collaboration, when you have members in different areas, you can support each other. You can pick up the phone. You're looking at a deal, let's say in Dallas. What members do we have in Dallas? Oh, we've got so and so and so and so. Great. You call them up. I'm looking at this deal in Dallas. What do you think? Can you take a look? Drive by. Do you have anything you can share? Oh, you know what? It's a great deal. I'm interested. Maybe I want to partner with you, or I can be your boots in the ground partner or resource, or they may have some other people to refer you, and vice versa. If someone's looking to a different market across Canada, what members do we have in those markets? So again, as the growth happens, we're just seeing the benefits in so many different ways. So I think those are some of the reasons why someone should really consider Wealth Genius, from the people standpoint, the support, the training, and then the expansion. We're not stopping where we're currently at. We're looking to continue to grow.
Yeah. Well, one thing I noticed from Wealth Genius, like from the get-go, is the energy. There's a unique energy amongst yourself and Alfonso, and I think it permeates to all of your students. I know in the Southern California event that Anthony and I visited at one time, it was, even though you were talking to just a handful of U.S. students, I saw it in your guys' eyes while on the stage, and it sparked the flame with me big time.
Yeah, I mean, we gotta make it a little bit fun too, guys, right? I mean, this is like, we spend so much time, and it's not just about crunching numbers. I mean, we want to make it an environment where people enjoy themselves, that it's interesting, it's exciting, and we do things like, besides like the training sessions, we do a lot of in-person events, right? So this upcoming weekend, I'll be flying to Toronto. We've got Expand, which is a member-only conference It's going to be crazy. We're going to have a gala night. They got DJs coming in. They're going to have a award ceremony. I mean, we got about 550 different members flying in from all across North America to attend this 3-day event. So it's going to be really exciting, a lot of fun. And then we'll follow that up with going to Tampa. And then in January, Alfonso taking a bunch of people to Costa Rica. So it's just like, or yeah, and he just got back from Italy about a month and a half ago. Sorry, from Spain about a month and a half ago. So, again, we're trying to make it where the environment is like it's not just educational. People are doing real deals, changing lives, but also implementing some enjoyment in this as well.
Yeah, you know what? Just to echo what John said, like the difference with Wealth Genius, I think, is exactly the people, right? And your engagement and how you guys, because I know for a fact, I mean, some of your webinars or your Zoom calls, I mean, there's hundreds of people in there. Like we have like 5 or 6 pages of, yeah, and then it's cool, just the energy. And I also like the fact that you guys work closely with these students, right? And you guys have like I don't know if it's a graduation thing or
Yes.
you bring them on stage. It's like a certificate. It's like a sense of accomplishment you make them feel. And I'll be honest, I haven't seen that. Like you really pump them up and get them geared up and really just get ready to like kind of dive into multifamily or whatever they're into. So that's what I think has been really cool and notice that's a big difference in your guys' program for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, like a family. Ultimately, we want to make it like a family environment. We want to make people feel like you're part of something. You're never left alone. So besides the coaching calls, you could be integrating welching and stuff every week, from connecting with members to attending workshops to online Zoom calls to all this stuff. So you can be immersed in this, and you're never alone. So if you're thinking about a deal you're analyzing, or you have a question on something, you pop in a post in the group. For sure, someone will answer. And you guys know how active is that Facebook group? It's like there's like probably 30 messages a day in there. So it's very active. Unlike many groups that we're all part of, it's like crickets, but very active group. People are introducing themselves and they're sharing what they're working on. They got a deal under contract or they're looking for money and stuff. Super active.
I have a question for you, Thomas, that it wasn't on our little template to ask you. As a coach, what have you learned about yourself?
Yeah, we have during our boot camp, we have a particular slide. It's like a hierarchy of learning. And actually, the highest level of learning is teaching.
Amen.
Think about that. Attending and participating is somewhere in the middle, but the highest amount of learning is when you teach. And why is that? Number one, you're repeating this over and over again. Number two, you're making adjustments. Number three, you're bouncing off of the feedback and the results that the audience or students are receiving it. So if you're saying something or teaching something and it doesn't have a positive effect, you have a problem. So you got to make some adjustments. But if you're seeing, wow, this is really working, then you do more of that. So for me, I mean, I really got into this about a year and a half ago. We really launched the coaching program for Wealth Genius for the US stream, as me as the coach, last August. And from there, we've been adding, and I've got, again, over 60 students at this moment. But it's just amazing to see kind of like, all right, in the initial conversation or how the process went and kind of like where things are today. And more refined, constantly making adjustments based on the feedback. So to answer that, in terms of how it's changed me, I think it's made me to constantly look at the results. So if my audience, my students aren't performing, what do I need to do? Right? Is it just kind of like just giving them a little nudge, just kind of like, helping them, encouraging them? Is it providing them something? As I mentioned, earlier, I do monthly master classes. So I'm always looking for resources to help them. I'm always thinking like during, in between calls or in between Zoom classes, what will help my students? What would I need if I was in their shoes, type of thing, right? So those are ways where, I mean, previously I wasn't thinking about that. And because of that, it keeps me engaged. So like I'm really fully immersed in this. So every day I'm at the point now, the coaching program, helping people is taking over the majority of what I do so that I'm always in that world. So it kind of keeps me polished, keeps me engaged, and I'm always looking for ways to kind of help.
I love that. As we're wrapping up here, Thomas, Anthony and I could talk to you for another 8 hours easily, easily.
Easily.
But we want to respect your time here.
Let's get a couple espressos, and we can be on here for a few more hours. No problem.
I mean, we've had Zoom calls with Thomas where we're just on for like 2 hours straight. But at this portion of our lightning round, Thomas, we're just going to ask a few random questions so that way our listeners can get to know the less professional, unbuttoned up with no tie version of Thomas. So the first question that I have is, hey man, you're stuck on an island somewhere in Nova Scotia. Is that in Canada? I don't even know. Right? We'll just pick an island somewhere off of Canada.
Can it be somewhere warm?
Okay, we'll warm. Okay, we'll go Tahiti, right?
Okay.
So you're stuck on an island in Tahiti. There's nobody there though.
Okay.
You're the only one that's there. But
All
you
right.
do have your iPhone, but you could only load up one musical artist or one album. I'll let you decide. But you have to pick one that you could listen to over and over and over again and not get sick and tired of it. What would that be?
Wow. This is not an easy question. I mean, because of what I tend to listen to, right? It's not necessarily one artist. So in general, I always have some sort of background music when I work. And then during the week, the only other time music would be at church. So like it'd probably be either praise and worship music going on in the background, and or it'd be some kind of like electronic music if I'm trying to get pumped up to do something, either physical activity or I'm working on a project that I need to kind of keep up. So it's not necessarily an artist, it's more like the type of music and stuff, right?
Of a genre.
Yeah, of a genre and stuff. So, but praise and worship, man. I mean, listen, I think it's a good segment for me to share. Like our faith, me and my wife and our family is such a huge component of our lives. We're born again Christians. Our lives, how everything has just come to this point, is all for God's glory. I mean, I wouldn't even be in California. I probably wouldn't even be in real estate if it wasn't for him. Just circumstances. When we look back, it's like how that happened, and then that happened, and then I met you, and then I'm here. It's just a whole story in itself. But ultimately, I'm just grateful and thankful.
Is there an album or an artist that you could think of in the Christian faith? Faith-based
Casting
artist?
Crowns. I like Third Day.
Third Day. There you go.
Yeah, I do like Third Day. They've got a couple songs. And again, just the words. One thing I found with Christian music, the words have such deep meaning. Just mainstream media, mainstream music, you start listening to words like, what does that even mean? You don't even understand it, right? Half the time. But just so the richness and then the purpose behind the writers of these songs, it's amazing. I mean, that's in terms of like if I was on an island, that's probably what I'd be listening to.
Yeah, it just hits different, right? Emotionally.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
That's awesome, man. So my next question is basically, I know you travel a lot, but that could be for business, of course. But as a vacation, if you were to vacation, would you prefer tropical or mountain area? And if so, where would it be?
Tropical or mountainous? I thought probably lean towards tropical. I'm more like, even though I'm born and raised in Canada, I've conformed. I like the heat. I need the ocean. I need somewhere where I got the beach. I can be at the beach like all day. I love it. So definitely somewhere tropical. If it was a specific place, like I have to say Italy. Like we went to Italy in 2019. Although it's not tropical, but just the history and just the culture. I'm half Italian, so there you go. I kind of raised on pasta, but besides even that, just the richness of our culture and history is just so much to see and do. So if you want to go to the beach, they got the beach. If you want to see like, historical stuff, they got buildings from like thousands of years. If you want to go mountains, they got mountains. If you want to go like, enjoy different types of food, I mean, the food's amazing type of thing. So definitely somewhere warm. And in terms of like, I can go to Italy over and over again. Honestly, I can go. Just there's so much history, so many things to see and do there.
That's great, man. So as we're wrapping things up and we're past the lightning round, I don't think we mentioned it earlier in the podcast, but where can our listeners find more information about Wealth Genius?
So the easiest way, wealthgenius.ai. Go to the website, give information on what Wealth Genius is all about, upcoming events. We may have an event in your market, so check it out. We're excited, as I mentioned. We're going to be in many cities across the U.S. this year. So that's probably the easiest place. We do also on Eventbrite. You can type in Wealth Genius and find events in the U.S. on Eventbrite. But for even more information, I direct people to the wealthgenius.ai website.
There we go. So everyone who's looking to get into real estate or who's already in a real estate but needs to scale and needs a little push to make it to the next level, 2 words, guys: Wealth Genius, Wealth Genius, Wealth Genius. And
That's it.
so, Thomas, thank you again for hopping on with Anthony and myself on the Nine Doors Down show, man. This has been remarkable. I always enjoy learning from you, brother. Every time I hop on, I'm always learning. And but for our listeners, we want to thank you guys for tuning in to the Nine Doors Down show. You can tune in on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, as well as on Spotify. Please give us a follow, give us a like, drop a couple comments. If it's a negative comment, toss it in there anyways. If you have a positive one, do 5 of those to offset the negative one. But on that note, for the Nine Doors Down show, we out.
Peace.